Hello, everybody. So thank you for joining us at this BSI event for well-being of people throughout their careers. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Nell, and I work at BSI as a committee manager, usually in the area of aging societies. But today I'm going to explore a little bit further than my usual reach and also talk about general well-being. So the aim of today is to talk about a few of the topics that are often overlooked in terms of the well-being of people in organizations. So things like ageism, menstruation and menopause, and then also talk about more generally well-being. So if we can go to the housekeeping, Dimple, that'd be great. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping points for everybody on the line. You are all on mute, so you don't have to worry about people being able to listen in the background. And we are recording this, so that is why we are all on mute to avoid any interruptions. If you do have any technical difficulties, you can use the Q&A function, or also if you have any questions for our panel at the end of the session, please put that in the Q&A. I'll be gathering all of those questions for you at the end of today to ask to our experts on the line. So thank you for posting that on the Q&A. In terms of feedback, we always want to hear your views on what you thought of this event and also maybe what you want to see in an upcoming event. If you're interested in a certificate for your CPD, you can also do that via the feedback survey. So I'm gonna go straight into it, go into the first speaker for today, and that's gonna be Ashton Applewhite. And you might recognize her actually because she has been on TED, so one of the TED Talk speakers, and it's been very inspiring for myself, and that's why I invited her today. And she's also written a book called This Share Rocks. So you might already be a little bit familiar with Ashton, so we're extremely happy to have her here today. And she's going to shed the light on ageism in the workplace, because that is one of those things that we are often don't think about when we're thinking about the people in our organizations. We actually published a standard at the beginning of this year in terms of aging societies to actually have an age-inclusive environment and how to create one of these. So we had a standard on that topic published earlier this year. So for us, it's really important to shed this light. And I'm so keen that Ashton has agreed to share that all with you as well. So Ashton, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Hello, everyone. It is great to be here. It might be counterintuitive to think that if you want to increase your well-being around aging, learn more about aging, because there's such sort of general aversion and hand-wringing when the subject comes up. If you had told me 15 years ago that I would become fascinated with aging, I would have said, why do I want to think about something sad and achy? But I got over those feelings by learning about longevity. And here are a couple of facts that took me by surprise because I came into it knowing nothing. First of all, aging is not something sad or annoying that old people do. Everyone is doing it. It is a lifelong process, right? We're because to live is to age, and aging is living. Aging is not dying. Dying is a discrete biological event that happens at the end of all that living. People may think I'm ancient, but they don't think I'm dying. Aging is not depressing. People are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives. It's called the U-curve of happiness. If you don't believe me, Google it. And aging is not disability. Plenty of younger people are disabled, and plenty of younger ones are not, although our bodies do work less well as we move through life. Some part of it, not everything falls apart, but some part is going to. And dementia rates are dropping as well. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease, but it is not typical of aging. It's not that our fears aren't real, it's that they're so out of proportion to the reality. And the more you know about aging, the better it looks. Whereas our anxiety about it makes us more vulnerable to exactly what we fear. People with more accurate views of aging, meaning fact rather than fear-based, walk faster, heal quicker, live longer, a lot longer, and are less likely to develop Alzheimer's, even if they are genetically predisposed to the disease. Another reason to learn about ageism, because it's bad for your health. Another thing about ageism, about aging, is that more of us are doing more of it. Population aging is a permanent global demographic trend. So why is this remarkable achievement so often described as a gray tsunami, my least favorite metaphor, of incapacitated old people? Because of ageism, discrimination and prejudice on the basis of age. The World Health Organization divides ageism into how we think, feel, and act about aging: stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. We experience ageism anytime someone assumes we are too old for something instead of finding out about us, what we're capable of, what we're like, or too young. Ageism cuts both ways, and younger people experience a lot of it. It's any judgment about a person or a group on the basis of how old we think they are. All prejudice relies on othering, seeing a group of people as other than ourselves, other color, other nationality, other sports team. The strange thing about ageism is that that other is us. Ageism is prejudice against our own future older selves. And ageism feeds on denial, our reluctance to acknowledge that we're going to get old, that we are aging, that we might even be old. Everyone is ageist. No one is born that way, but attitudes start to form in early childhood because negative messages about late life come at us from the media and popular culture at every turn. And unless we stop to question these messages, they become part of our identity. That's internalized bias. And most bias is unconscious. We're not aware of it, but we can't challenge it until we become aware of it. And awareness isn't enough. We don't become less biased because we attended a training or a memo landed on our desk or you showed up for a webinar today to listen to me. We have to want to become less biased. It's hard. It's a practice. And it's also incredibly rewarding. Think about it. Do any of you now really believe that you are a lesser version than the person you used to be, less interesting, less talented? If you do, think about where those messages come from and what purpose they serve. It is not healthy to go through life dreading our futures. We are just beginning to wake up to all the ways ageism harms us individually and collectively. I've touched on the ways in which it harms our health, and that is why the World Health Organization, not the World Old People Organization, launched a global campaign to combat ageism last year to increase health span along with the longer lifespans that are increasing globally, the amount of years we spend in good health. Ageism segregates us. Ageism fills us with needless dread. And above all, like all prejudice, ageism pits us against each other. Pitting young against old, like pitting groups of low-wage workers against each other, or stay-at-home moms against mothers in the paid workforce, is a time-honored tactic, divide and conquer, used to split groups up that might otherwise organize and unite to change the status quo. For billionaires in the 1%, the status quo is working great. For most of humanity, not so much, which is probably one reason that Nell organized this webinar around well-being. Discrimination in the workforce serves a set of economic purposes, allowing companies to dismiss older workers when they can be replaced by cheaper younger ones, and keeping overall wages low by setting a cap on total compensation. This provides ideological cover for unacceptable business practices, practices that enable workers at both ends of the age spectrum to be taken advantage of. It's really important not to frame this in terms of old versus young. People also overlook or excuse bias against older workers on the grounds that it's natural for olders to leave their jobs to make room for younger ones. The myth that older workers crowd out younger ones is called the fallacy of the lump of labor, and economists have debunked it countless times. If jobs are scarce, it's true in the narrowest sense, but that's a labor market problem, not a too many old people problem. There's actually a positive correlation. When more older people are employed, employment increases among younger people. That zero-sum way of thinking isn't just ignorant, it's wrong because it's discriminatory, and all discrimination is wrong. There is nothing natural or justifiable about giving ageism a pass and discrimination in the workplace or anywhere else. So why then is intergenerational framing and tension so widespread, this you versus old versus young way of thinking? 4 reasons. Generational labels are convenient. I mean, I always think they're worse in the United States, where I believe it's the US that came up with the baby boomers and millennials, but I know that these labels operate everywhere as a kind of cultural shorthand. The concept is very handy for journalists, for social scientists, for marketers, and it's convenient for the rest of us too. Belonging to a generation contributes to a sense of personal and collective identity. We like to put things in buckets. It's easier than addressing the really complex reality, which is that millions and millions of people born around the same time could not possibly be alike in any deep way, except, roughly their birth years. Reason number two, narratives in the media promote competition and resentment. Because we're healthier and living longer, older people are staying on the job longer, and younger colleagues, understandably anxious for change and upward mobility, are often impatient for us to move on. The media, which thrives on conflict and ageist clickbait, those awful and semi-irresistible things about, what millennials do or don't do, or what older should or shouldn't wear, that feeds scarcity thinking and this idea that more for you means less for me, and that generations are really different from each other. And that undermines empathy and collaboration. And I know I don't need to tell you that collaboration is essential in the workplace to get your work done and get it done as well as possible. Number three, generation consulting is profitable, a whole lucrative industry, in fact. From books to podcasts to consultancies, there is a lot of money to be made by asserting that differences between generations are real and significant, and by helping companies and worried managers deal with these presumed differences. Advice on coping with 5 generations in the workplace has become a thing, as though this were a huge problem. And in fact, it's not even mathematically possible. Think about it. Number 4, generational finger pointing is tempting. Every generation complains about the people who came before and grumbles about kids these days. It's easier to blame than to work to connect, right? But it's also divisive and lazy. It's incumbent on older workers to adapt to changing culture and practice in the workplace and the world. We can't expect respect and engagement unless we practice it. And needless to say, the same goes for our younger colleagues. It is important to acknowledge difference. Being young is different from being middle-aged, which is different from being even older than that, like me. Denying or papering over that reality with statements like age is just a number or you're ageless is part of a universal phenomenon in which people maintain, often with the best of intentions, that they don't see difference. When that happens, we close ourselves off to perceiving the intrinsic value of our differences, the ways in which aspects of ourselves that include oldness, blackness, queerness, and disability enrich our lives and make us us. These differences can cause friction. This stuff is not simple. Like groups that are diverse in other ways, age-mixed teams are valuable because they bring together people with complementary abilities, skills, information, and networks. If members are willing to share, appreciate, acknowledge, and learn from these differences. And age has much less to do with affinity than we think it does. If I leave you with one idea, that would be it. Similar age groups are socially sanctioned. We're used to them. They're familiar. It's easier to hang out with people who look like us in age and every other way. But age fit, like culture fit, which is workplace code for people like me, is more about habit and comfort than actual affinity. And the more time we spend in mixed age company, the more evident that fact becomes. And the workplace is no exception. How many times have we heard these ageist stereotypes? Boomers are out of touch, inflexible, incompetent. Millennials, lazy, entitled, disloyal. But how could any generalization about millions of people roughly around the same age? There's no scientifically agreed on definition of generation. How could it possibly be accurate? Guess what? When people my age were in our 20s, we job hopped too. It's an age effect, not a cohort effect, a function of how old you are, not when you happen to be born. Because in our 20s, we're trying to figure out what to do, what's our path. And guess what? Old people use Slack. It's right here on my computer. And young people answer the phone sometimes. Guess what? Everyone loves flex time. Generational stereotypes are not our friend. They contaminate every corner of the workplace. They from decision making to how colleagues perceive and treat each other, and they obscure the much richer and more interesting and complex reality. They make people feel devalued and excluded. And most damagingly, generation is used to exaggerate what age cohorts have in common and how they differ. Both the 1% and the 99% are made up of all ages. And when we claim shared status on the basis of age alone, it ignores the legacy of systemic racism, and it also erases the gender wage gap, which starts at age 32 in the US for women, and it widens faster for women of color. So what do we do about it? How can we avoid falling into old versus young ways of thinking? 3 suggestions. First, the hardest, most necessary step is to check your own bias. Remember, we all have these biases inside us. The minute we hear someone's name or encounter a generational label, all these fixed ideas click into place in each of us. No judgment. But that's why the most important step is to examine those attitudes, because we can't challenge bias until we're aware of it, and these are new ideas to most of us. They did an experiment that found that people assigned to teach someone a computer-related task did a lousier job and had lower expectations completely unconsciously if they were teaching someone who was not young. HR professionals routinely acknowledge that older people perform as well or better than younger hires. Again, but watch out for comparing. What we need is all ages. And yet they constantly discriminate against older job seekers. Prejudice is not rational. So check your own age bias and keep checking it. It's a process. Second, look hard at whether conflicts are actually age-related. When disagreements arise in the workplace from colleagues from different ages, it's convenient to blame that gap. Our ageist culture exaggerates perceived differences and undermines mutual trust and goodwill. They feel unappreciated, you feel judged. Justified or not, the tension is real. Here's an example from a project at the University of California in Berkeley, where they put together some retired people and some college students to create a set of wellness products. And when older members were slow to respond to texts from younger members of the team, relations got strained and work slowed. So project leaders asked everyone to spend a week on high alert for age-based assumptions, any assumption about anyone, including themselves, their own, other people's assumptions. And what happened was they realized that younger team members assumed that if they sent a text after working hours, that would get a quick response because they were urgent. The older people figured work could wait until morning. So problem identified. And then you can apply basic conflict resolution skills, just like we can apply what we've learned about addressing sexism and other kinds of discrimination to age discrimination. Address the specific problem in the context of a shared goal. In this case, agreeing on communication norms so the project can get back on track. Acknowledge that differences, disagreements are bound to crop up when people have had different experiences, right? This makes things feel less personal. When those older people were in school, there was no texting. You couldn't reach people after working hours. There wasn't even email, right? This is not a conflict about values. So take it down. And it is easier to empathize with people we identify with in some way. So look for common ground. I love leadership expert Amy Gallo's mantra. She says, it's cliched, I know, but we are all getting older. To cut through the impulse to judge or stereotype, I have a mantra. That was me, that will be me, right? We're all on this journey. Third, consider other explanations for what people do or don't have in common. Because we live, especially in the US, in such an age-segregated society, few of us hang out with people much older or younger than ourselves. So it makes sense that we attribute, similarities to being close in age and blame differences on someone being much older or younger. But other identifiers, class, ethnicity, geography, gender, sexual orientation, to name just a few, actually play a much bigger role in shaping what we have in common or don't, whether we get along with someone or whether we don't. So it is important to look at how much tension stems from actual age differences instead of assuming that first assumption, which we all do, no judgment, that those differences exist because of age and that they matter. Right? That team figured it out. You know, they didn't have to have the same experiences. They just had to understand what the conflict was actually about. And also, last but not least, try to use the word generation, literally, less, a lot less. And there's wonderful research being done about this in the UK at the University of York. Instead, talk about people of different ages. Describe groups as mixed age or age integrated. Create teams that are age diverse instead of labeling people members of generation this or that. Describe them as older or younger. That works. It's simpler. It's always accurate. It doesn't divide or stereotype. It emphasizes that we age in relation to others, right? You can be the oldest person on one team and at the same time the youngest person on another. And we are all on this ride called aging, and we can make it harder or easier for each other in the workplace and everywhere else. That was me. That will be me. Thank you very much.
Ashton, that was fantastic. I mean, you've condensed so much information in those 15 minutes. I will definitely be embracing the differences and mixing in the different groups of people. So at least we will make a difference together. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome.
So then we're going to put it into a perspective of the workplace even further in terms of general well-being. So we're joined by Kate Fields, who is BSI's Global Head of Health and Safety and Well-being. So I'm going to head over to you, Kate.
Lovely, thank you. And what an amazingly inspirational presentation to follow. So I will do my best to follow that amazing session with Ashton and provide you with maybe some practical guidance about what this looks like in the workplace, and particularly within the context of workplace well-being. So if we move on to the next slide, our first question has to be, and the next slide, thank you. Our first question has to be, what is workplace well-being? Well, I mean, it's really interesting because it's evolved over a period of time, but fundamentally, if I'm brutally honest, it is still really used as a sticking plaster over problems within the workplace, whatever they happen to be, you know, whether it's poor recruitment, retention, poor engagement, poor productivity, issues around bullying, harassment, discrimination. You know, these are often a set of initiatives, things to do to tick a box to say it's been done to try and address issues without really looking at what the underlying issues are and what it needs to be done in terms of a holistic approach. And one of the key things with workplace wellbeing strategies is they're often delivered in silos. So we'll maybe have some activities looking at menopause, which we're going to be talking about a bit more difference. We might have some activities looking at ageism. We might have some activities looking at more general health. We might have some activities looking at mental health. But all of these things will be done in isolation, and they won't be thinking about it in a holistic way, and therefore the impact is always limited. So I'm going to step you through, if we move on to the next slide, what is actually workplace wellbeing? Because one of the challenges we have is there hasn't been any definition. There are lots of definitions of wellbeing, but there hasn't actually really been any definition of workplace wellbeing up until a year ago, when a new international standard was developed and published, ISO 45003, and that has provided our first international definition of workplace wellbeing. You can see it on the screen there. Fulfillment, so crucial word, fulfillment of the physical, mental, social and cognitive needs and expectations of a worker related to their work. So you can see this is an all-encompassing definition. This isn't just about yoga and yoga and being a little bit more physically healthy. It's not just about, you know, doing some mental health resilience training for your mental health or having a few mental health first aiders. It is looking at the entire person and what is their needs and expectations for fulfillment. And actually, at the heart of this, it comes back to the culture of the organization and creating a culture of trust. But of course, how do we do that? What are the elements that are needed? So if we move on to the next slide, last year we published a new framework for workplace wellbeing, really looking at all of the different elements that go on within a workplace to address creating the right cultural environment, creating an authentic culture of trust for organisations, and really trying to break it down in a step-by-step way so that organisations can then build those steps back up to create a holistic, integrated approach to workplace wellbeing rather than just focusing on a couple of initiatives. And looking at it in this way, in a focusing on it in kind of this holistic way, you actually generate really powerful impacts and long-term benefits. One of the things we see with a lot of wellbeing initiatives is because they are tick box initiatives, they have maybe some short-term positive impact. You know, your employee engagement surveys might go up because everybody's been given a free water bottle, but actually, you know, by the time you do the next survey, the scores will have gone back down because you're not dealing with the underlying issues, bullying, harassment, or whatever it happens to be. So within the context of today's session, I'm just going to go through this model and just pull out a few elements that are particularly relevant to the subjects in terms of intergenerational working and menopause. But I do want to reiterate that, you know, this applies to all of your people activities. But I'm just going to pull out some areas to focus on. So you'll see in this model that it's broken down into kind of 3 areas, and for those of you who are familiar with it, it's kind of inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, recognizing that we need some basic foundations in place to create basic security, what we might talk about as psychological kind of safety elements and physical safety elements. Then we need to develop what are called psychological needs, and this is really starting to look at this piece around fulfillment. What is it that people need to create fulfillment? And by doing that, you get to the top level, which is fulfillment, and really importantly, that unlocks the creativity and innovation that organizations need to survive for the long term. So if we move on to the next slide, let's start with basic needs. So this is really kind of broken it into a couple of areas. So we've got kind of the physical side, the physiological side. So there are a number of areas that could touch on. So personal health is where a lot of traditional wellbeing initiatives are. Your yoga and yoga, eating well, encouraging good sleep practice, all of those sorts of things. And that's important, but it goes much further than that. So if we're thinking about things like menopause, welfare, it becomes really important because that deals with issues around heating and ventilation. One of the challenges, as I'm starting to experience as I enter perimenopause, is our temperature control. So the ability to be able to regulate temperature at a local level, depending on the needs of an individual, becomes really important. A really key aspect both for intergenerational work and also those who are reaching menopause is really effective return to work and rehabilitation programs. Now, it's called absence management, but actually it's stay in work management. You know, I think there's often a misconception that if somebody is ill, maybe with a chronic illness or undergoing cancer treatment, or actually, you know, having particularly profound complications around their menopause, that, you know, if they're not 100% fit, they can't work. But actually we need to look at it the other way. Maybe they are 60% fit, so they can do 60% of work. So when we're looking at absence management and rehabilitation, it's really about enabling somebody to stay in work, because we know that if they stay in work, they will actually quite often recover more. It will help with their physical health, it will help with their mental health. So having really effective stay in work practices is really important. If we move on to the next slide, So, you know, you saw my title, Health, Safety and Wellbeing. I'm not going to talk about health and safety, but there are a number of issues when we're looking at intergenerational work in a menopause. And I picked out some of these in a paper called Diversity in Personal Protective Equipment. And there's a link to that, and that touches on some of the challenges. But on this point, the kind of two elements I wanted to pull out, Ashton's already talked about issues around discrimination and bullying and harassment, and that's about creating this basic need about having a workplace that is free from that sort of adverse social behaviour. So this is really you're eliminating those really negative behaviours. But secure and sustainable employability, secure is about job security, but sustainable employability is about lifelong career and really thinking about and designing your whole career program to meet the needs of an intergenerational workforce and ensuring that those, whether people at the beginning or towards the end of their working career, are still having and getting that sense of fulfillment. So sustainable employability is really critical. So if we move on to the next slide, and I'm conscious of time, and the next slide, I'm just because of time, I think, please. So, you know, when we're looking at creating the right culture, we've got to create a culture that means that people are able to feel that they can talk about their needs and their expectations in a way that is focused on trust, you know, that then there isn't going to be retaliation or discrimination against them. And this is where creating this culture around fair and respectful workplaces becomes really important. And if we move on to the next slide, I just really want to focus that there's some additional material here, but Ashton summed up, I think, one of the things that's really powerful about creating the right environment for intergenerational workforce, and for me, in terms of what workplace wellbeing done effectively really achieves. And that's about creating a truly diverse workforce. And if we do that, we create a level of creativity and innovation that is hugely critical to organizational's long-term success. We talk about organizational resilience, and if you look at what's needed for organizational resilience, it's about having a really diverse, enabled, empowered, fulfilled workforce, and that's what we're aiming to deliver. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kate. Again, so much in 10 minutes. Thank you so much for setting the context around what we're talking about in more detail today. So it's really great for that. And then I would like to introduce Madu. Madu Kapoor is joining us from M for Menopause. And excitingly, she is also a member of our panel that is working on a new standard for menstruation and menopause in organizations, trying to find a guide for organizations. She's helping us write that, and she's also writing her own book that is publishing next month. And I believe the title, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is It's Our Menopause. Let's make it work for us. So that's really great. So I'm very excited to hear your story with menopause, and so we can see a bit more detail about what we might need to do in an organization.
Thank you, Nellie. And it is called It's Our Menopause. Thank you very much. So hi everyone, I am the founder of M for Menopause. In what I do is focus on providing tailored support for women, families, employers, and in communities. So could I just have the next slide, please? Thanks. The next slide after that. So this is just a simple Google search that I did last week. And I typed in menopause women. I just want you to have a few seconds just looking at it and just see, you know, give me your thoughts, not give me your thoughts, but just think about what you actually see. So for me, I mainly see grey-haired Caucasian women. And this is what I believe that we need to challenge, because menopause doesn't just impact women that are actually in the images that you see in front of you. But we have to realize that we have women and individuals who are from different ages, ethnicities, sexualities, and so on, to name a few. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, as you can see, I am sort of not one of the women from these images that you can actually see. I'm just waiting for the next slide to come up. But basically, what I realized, having seen these images, the fact that when I was going through my perimenopause journey, how unseen and unheard I actually felt. So I've actually underlined my road to resignation, basically because I've been working with many women over the years, and what I've realized is that no menopause journey is the same. And this is what everyone sort of needs to understand, especially if you're an employer. So pre-menopause, what was I like? So I was that woman that would just get on and carry on. If I had any hurdles to face, I would face it, or I might ignore them and just carry on in doing what I would normally do. But it's just made me think about, why is it that I sort of behaved that way? You know, is it because of how society has sort of dictated how we should behave when it comes to women's health? You know, do I have that British stiff upper lip, or is it the upbringing that I've actually had being a South Asian woman? And I actually think it's probably a combination of all three. So I was in a role for many years where I was a recruitment specialist, and I supported individuals ranging I worked with different individuals where they were from different ages, and they had, came from different backgrounds, but it was actually helping all of them to actually have one target, which was to get back into work. And I did engage with the council as well as working with the employers in the borough. And I loved the role that I actually had. I actually thought I would retire there. I was very confident, able to work independently, and I thrived and progressed. But I was well respected in the role that I actually had. However, in my early 40s, when I began to actually change, and it affected my work. And on the right hand of the screen, what you can actually see are some of the symptoms that I've outlined there. But I actually had 50% out of the 34 symptoms that you could possibly get through in menopause. And how was I affected? So, it affected me every single day. And emotionally, it was the meetings that I was used to attending. It was sort of, those meetings should have been second nature for me. And it didn't work out that way, because slowly I began to change, and I'd be panicking before attending meetings. Now I'd have a feeling of nausea in my stomach, which I just couldn't get rid of. And my mind would just be whizzing around in thoughts, and it would be negative thoughts. Attending the meetings would involve me not being able to concentrate or focus on what was being said in the meeting. And then for me to have sentences or reply back, I wouldn't be able to. It just affected the independent woman that I used to be, to actually become someone that doubted her capabilities at work. Then I had my physical symptoms after that. And one thing I want to say is that the symptoms don't just actually happen overnight. They actually occur over sort of, it takes about a few years for these symptoms to sort of get in place, I would say. Not in place, but it can affect a woman very slowly, is what I want to say. So the physical symptoms, some of them I'll just name, is sort of, I had the insomnia and the night sweats. And basically it could be 2:30 in the morning where I would be wide awake, and I'd wake up dripping with sweat, wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. But this would be happening day in and day out every single night. But I had to still carry on at work, focusing on the target, being the person that everybody knew that I was, and just carry on. And then the other symptom that I actually faced was the heavy irregular periods and the incontinence with in the fear that I would have, which would increase my anxiety, would be the fact of me having an accident or, you know, embarrassing myself not getting to the washroom in time. So eventually it got to the stage where I wasn't coping at work, and I built up the courage to speak to my manager and ask her for help to sort of go through what I was actually feeling and you know, what I was actually going through. Having built that courage to do that, I just felt shut down and immediately knew that she wasn't listening, because all she was just focused on were the targets. Over the few months after that was a time where I came to the realization that I couldn't cope at work. I wasn't coping anymore. I wasn't that same individual that I used to be. And I just saw no way out, and I ended up resigning. And that was in 2016, March 2016. What really hurts me when I think about it now, that I gave my life to my employer for 23 years, and very few questions were asked when I actually left. Could I have the next slide, please? So the reason, this was actually the main reason I set up for menopause. I wanted to make sure that other women, working women, were not in the same position that I was actually in, and just want to make sure that I'm supporting the employers and employees. So, you know, we hear that there's, you know, there is a lot of guidance out there around menopause. It currently assumes that, you know, we have so much time on our hands, we have the resources, we have the motivation, we're not aging, we're just, you know, we're able to cope. And actually, it's not the case when you go through the menopause. Sometimes a woman can change and they're not that same individual. That's why I wrote It's Our Menopause. It's actually to help. It's one of the first books on how to navigate menopause in work. And, you know, the aim is to ensure that women can balance their health and their career whilst they're actually still working, but they can actually take actions in their own pace, and they're not under pressure. What I have developed is a talk framework, which is based on my experience in supporting other women, and I use that on a regular basis now, and it focuses on the 4 pillars, which you can actually see on the left. What's included in my book, it's action based with manageable options for working women. There are case studies in there which go across different industries, and it covers elements about a woman when they are going through the menopause, regarding how life can get affected with their families, at work, as well as any medical advice that they need to receive. So I'm very excited the fact that the book is coming out next month. But what I have actually learned over the years, having worked with women and individuals, is the fact that the employers do need to play a big role, especially because there's so many women that are working. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. So in this, what I've actually learned in my journey and supporting employers as well as working women, the key lessons that I have learned and have taken away is the fact that you can make small changes, and the fact that you can make these changes can have a major positive impact on your workforce. So the first P is preparation. How prepared is your workforce? Everyone needs to be aware about menopause and have knowledge about it. You know, you may see an employee where they are changing in their behavior or in their performance, and it's actually taken a step back to realize, oh, something might be happening there, what can I do? But if you have that harsh approach of, if a manager or a colleague takes a harsh approach, the impact that would actually have on that individual, you know, may result in resigning. And that's what you want to prevent, to ensure that you have your satisfied, loyal, committed employees still at work, working with you. You also may need to consider, you know, are the managers comfortable supporting their employees when it comes to the menopause? How open are the conversations at your company, and do all of your workforce know what support systems you actually have in place, or where you can actually direct colleagues who may need support. The second P is about the people that work with you. You know, it's ensuring that you provide a tailored support for the individuals. Having policies is a major process that is a strong foundation in your organization. But what you need to recognize is how it's important, how the fact that having a policy that one size does not fit all, and you need to take into account, as basically Ashton actually said, and Kate has been speaking about, is, you know, individually looking at an employee. They may be going through different symptoms. They may be from a different environment outside of work. They might have, you know, they might be from a different ethnicity. Their job role may be different than others, you know, and there could be other equality characteristics that you need to sort of consider beyond menopause, and that includes age, gender, sexuality, and if they have disability or any health issues. What you need to realize that this can all impact an individual when they're actually going through the menopause. The final P is progress. If you do have something in place, don't think that it's just a once-off exercise that you do and you don't need to look back at it again. You need to actually keep up the momentum, repeat it, reflect it, and renew it. If you implement a policy, or you're holding a workshop, or you've got a process in place, revisit it. And also don't assume that it is, you know, that it's working. You need to sort of go back and have a look and actually analyze if it is working. Revisit the policy and the process regularly, because the dynamics in your organization may change. Having regular check-ins, if you have done adjustments for employees, the individuals, if they are going through the menopause, it's checking in on them regularly and making sure that that is working. If it's not working, then what you need to do is sort of reflect on any other options that you could support them with and actually renew those adjustments. So on the final slide that I have is just a quote that I've got in my book, and I just want you to have a look at that. But I just want to take this moment for you to read that, and all I would like to say is please do get in touch. I would love to hear from you and find out about what you're doing in your organisation and hear about menopause. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Madu. Thank you for the courage to also share that story with us. I think it's important that people do share what's happened to them, and it can maybe be a help to someone else in the future. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I want to continue the story really, because as I mentioned, we are writing this new standard in this area. And that's why I want to introduce Lauren Sharon, who's the CEO of Women of a Certain Stage. And she's going to join us to talk a little bit further around that. So thank you, Lauren.
Great, I'm just seeing if I got my slides. I believe I have. So just while we're waiting for the first slide to come up, my name's Lauren Sharon. I just left my job in my early 40s, believing I had early onset dementia. It took 3 months after that to find out that actually I'd just been through what turned out to be a premature menopause. I'd had my son at 37, and I had fed him for a year, was on contraception that meant that I didn't have a bleed afterwards. So I had no real clue that my periods had stopped. And that's led me to speak all over the world and to work with organisations globally to help them understand what menopause is and what we can do about it to ensure that they are embracing the whole conversation around menstruation all the way through to menopause and beyond. So today I'm just super excited to be able to introduce the Menstrual Health and Menopause in the Workplace Guide, which is the British standard into menstruation and menopause that's going out for consultation. And one of the key things I just invite you to think about is that this whole conversation is about progress. It's not about perfection, it's about recognising that the workplace was built for men, designed for men. There's no criticism in there whatsoever, but the workplace nowadays is completely different. People of all ethnicities, ages, stages of life are part of that workplace, and we're using our voices now to create culture change that means that we have a playing field that we can all take part in. So first of all, I just want to scene set, and this is something that the standard does really well, is just to say that menopause can be experienced, symptoms can be experienced by women, by transgender community, by our gender questioning and our non-binary colleagues as well. So I want you just to think about menopause in its entirety, be mindful. Clearly, we're all in our own inclusion journey, and we're going to be more comfortable with different language. So use whatever language is most familiar to you. And when I talk about women, I'm probably referring to specific statistics or analysis that's been done on women, which most menstruation and menopause research has been, but often I'll be saying they or them because that is going to be more inclusive. So we're going to just touch on the kind of core facts, ages, stages, definitions. What are the symptoms and how they manifest? Why are we talking about menstruation and menopause at work? And how we can potentially support ourselves and the people around us as well in the workplace. Now, in the standard, I think the great thing is that we start off with a blank canvas. We have a look at, the overall scope of who's included. So as I've said, our transgender, non-binary, gender questioning community, our women. We need to be really cognizant of just all the bias and all the thoughts that we've had about, people taking time off for their periods, or, that old person when we talk about menopause. But we can just scrap that for a minute. And I think in the canvas, in the standard, it is great just to have that explanation of what menstruation is, explanation of what menopause is as well. And when we just think about getting clarity on who is experiencing these things. For example, in the workplace, we know that endometriosis or fibroids, other conditions that people are struggling with for many, many years, and often hiding and masking in the workplace, taking time off, but not maybe declaring why they're taking that time off. Whereas if we all understood the fullness of what a menstrual cycle is, what a normal menstrual cycle could look like, what perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause life is like, if we've got clarity around those definitions and we've got a good understanding, so much so that we can talk about it in the same way as we would do about puberty. Again, it's been touched on already. Different cultures, different ethnicities, different backgrounds will experience menstruation and menopause differently. There'll be different symptoms, often in different parts of the country, different cultures, different backgrounds, lifestyle factors, genetics and ethnicity all play a role in how we experience our menstruation and our menopause. On average, we will experience menstruation for 37 years. And when we become menopausal, that means we've gone 12 months without a bleed, we've probably got on average another 37 years to go. Throughout all of those years of going through menstruation, we're building up incredible skills, knowledge and experience in the workplace. So it's really important that our employers learn how to embrace that, because we've then got another 30 or 40 years when we can continue to deliver, continue to contribute with all of our skills, knowledge and experience. But when we think about symptoms, and there's a few up there on the screen, when I went through all of this 8 years ago, I was told there was about 34 symptoms. And depending what research you read, you're going to hear that there are many, many more or less than that. The important thing is that we just recognise that what is driving our monthly cycle, our progesterone, our testosterone, those three key hormones, throughout all the time that we're having our monthly cycles, they may be in sync with each other and we may just go through that flow. And yet when we hit perimenopause, and maybe for a few years before and after our menopause, we might find that we are not feeling in the full flow because we haven't been educated about it. And we haven't known exactly how to get the right help and support, and nor of the people around us. So in section 5 in the standard, there's lots of good practical tips, lots of actions that we can take, looking at, why is it that we are actually talking about menopause? Why are we looking at menstruation in the workplace? How does that actually change the landscape if we can put the practical things into place so that people can access sanitary wear, or they can have access to cool natural light? They can have temperature control. Bringing the temperature down can often be really helpful. Looking at the types of work people are doing, when they're doing it, what sort of hours they're working, what type of help and support is available. We know that people perform best when the stress and pressure is taken off of them. We know that if we can create an environment in the workplace, look at the physical aspects of our work, the psychological aspects of our work, that we can look at everything around and create psychologically safe spaces where we can look at the choices on how we can adapt and change the working environment and the roles that people are performing at work, that we're going to increase performance overall. When we look at the entire employee journey from job design all the way through recruitment, all the way through the types of metrics we use to measure performance and attendance, all the way through to exit, we look at, are these things, are they really supporting someone who's got menstrual cycle? Are they really supporting someone who might be experiencing symptoms of peri to postmenopause? So by looking at, the standards, it looks very much at what is in your existing policy and guidance documents. Have you already got these things covered? It's not mandating that there must be a menopause policy or a guidance document, but it's saying in the round, do you have the right messaging in your policies, in your guidance documents, to look to see that people are supported if they need help and support. It's about looking, collectively across the organisation. It's looking right across business to see, what is this thing called menstruation? What is this thing called menopause? How are people being impacted? Looking at it from a legal point of view, from our health and safety point of view, from 1974, are we doing risk assessments? Are we making sure that we're creating safe places for our colleagues to work? If someone's got recurring symptoms, either from menstruation or menopause, actually, are we having a conversation with them with the Equality Act being front of mind? There are a number of protected characteristics in there: age, sex, disability. If someone's got symptoms that are going on for 12 months or more, technically that could be classed as disability. So therefore, an employee would be able to have a conversation with the employer and look at potential reasonable adjustments to accommodate that. We're not saying someone is disabled, we're just saying that there is a technicality there that provides them. Equally under the Equality Act, in the standard, we talk about being mindful of your language, being inclusive in your language, making sure that you're not falling prey of using bullying and harassment language. Understanding as an employer that it's going to cost an average of £26,000 to £37,000 to replace a lost member of staff. Recognising that people who are going through monthly cycles and menopause have got so much to offer, so many skills, knowledge and experience that they can share with the business, it makes complete business sense to become menopause and menstruation savvy and supportive. Our demographics, as I mentioned at the beginning, women over 50 are the fastest growing economically active group in the UK alone. So if we recognise that the workplace has to change, we need to recognise that our menstruation and menopause symptoms impact our performance at work, and our work environment can impact our symptoms as well. So we have to look at the entire role type. We need to look at what type of jobs people are doing, what type of environments they're working in, what type of industry they're in as well. There is no one size fits all because there is no one singular experience of menstruation or menopause. Everyone has to be supported. But making the culture shifts and changes is a big part of the standard. It's a big part of what it's recommending and suggesting and encouraging people to look at. What are the small things that can be done to make big changes, to create a more inclusive, supportive working environment? We know that there are, a number of employment tribunals that have successfully mentioned menopause now. Whilst the numbers are small, there is also a large number of people being or leaving their jobs, as both Madu and I did. So we need to think smartly about menopause, and the standard is a really great place with it's absolutely packed with lots of great suggestions of things that you can consider depending on the type of environment and type of workplace that you are in. There's a number of annexes there as well, and in Annex B, I think one of the great things when we're looking in there is about the culture change. It's looking at what are the performance metrics that you should be using and can use to support somebody going through menopause. What is and how do you hold a confidential conversation? How do you prepare for it? How do you handle? How do you follow up and support somebody? Whether you're the person that is creating the conversation with someone you're looking for support from, or indeed you're supporting somebody who needs that additional help and support. Clearly, we want to be having these conversations before performance is even on the horizon. If we notice there's someone in our team, a colleague around us, that is not being their usual self, what could we potentially say and do? Could we be asking them what's going well? Could we be asking them what help and support they need? There's lots of great language in the standard to help with these conversations and to help nudge people forward to intervene and support from a good place before things get to the point where we're starting to worry about performance. Thinking about the workplace risk assessments and overall team management, all of these things fall into that culture change that needs to happen in order to become really menstruation and menopause savvy. We need to think about the reasonable adjustments, and this will be dictated by role type, will be dictated by industry, and I think it's really important always to remember that if you've got someone who's been performing super well and suddenly there are changes, then that is a great time just to step back, observe, think about what might be going on for that person, create a space where you can have a conversation, remove any judgments and just get into a conversation based on curiosity, looking to see how you can help and support going forward. There's so many things that people can do to help and support themselves when they're going through menopause, and this is clearly not about that today, but I think it's just important to know that it's a time when we need to be really investing in our self-care and supporting each other. Making sure we're hydrated well, we're eating well, we're moving our body, and workplace has got such a big role to play in supporting us to be able to do that as well. So when you have a read of the standard, if you haven't done already, I'd be really excited to hear from you to find out what do you believe that you can do differently. There's so many simple things that can be put in place, whether it is, as I said, access to natural light, water, having access to sanitary wear or a change of clothes, somewhere to freshen up. And clearly these things will take a little bit more ingenuity to put in place depending on what type of role you're looking at. One of the key things I love to say to people is just that, we all can have a mean person in our head. When things don't go well, we can give ourselves a bit of a kick up the backside. And I love this Brené Brown quote, which is just talk to yourself like someone you would know. So we want to be hearing good, positive things about people who experience menstruation and menopause. We want the people around them supporting them to feel confident to have those conversations as well. So another part of the standards is looking at the recruitment barriers. So again, thinking about what is it that we're saying and doing when we're bringing people on board that we can remove? What barriers are there in place that potentially might turn someone off? So again, looking at the entire employee life cycle is really important to be able to make sure that we're creating that even playing field. In Annex D, we're looking at the culture change. There's some great top tips in there about communication, about training plans, looking at the different types of roles, line management training, training for HR, training menopause champions or ambassadors or allies. We had a number of conversations around what these types of roles could be. So there's lots of great, rich information in there. There is an annex with the checklist. Again, it's a great place to start to think about what are you currently doing in your organisation? What could you add in to take that movement one step forward? So I'm Sharon. I'm CEO and founder of Women of a Certain Stage, and I simply want that can create workplace environments that having menstrual cycles and going through menopause and everything in between is no longer a barrier. thank you very much for your time, for listening, and if I can help and support in any way, it would be my absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren, to walk us through that standard and what we've been working on for the last few months. And I'm glad to say that we hope to have a public consultation open to everybody to provide their feedback on what we have done, probably at the end of this month. I don't know if the events team can put my email address there. So if you have an interest to read it, that we can provide you with the link once it has published, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. So I want to ask all the speakers to turn their camera on, and I want to introduce two new speakers to you that are joining us to make sure we're covering all our bases with the experts today. So we are including also Rebecca Heerslova from the Federation of Small Businesses and also Alicia Page from Bloody Good Employers. So welcome the both of you as well. So let me have a look at all the questions, because we've been having questions come in from the audience in advance and on the chat now. So maybe it's good to put our two newbies on the spots. So perhaps we can start, Rebecca, with the first question, if you don't mind. So in terms of small businesses, you might come across this quite often, that they want to involve their staff and have a good well-being, but how can they do that on a limited budget? Do you have any advice for them?
Hi everyone, it's lovely to join the panel and thank you for this question. It is indeed something that is raised to us. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Rebecca and I work as a policy advisor at the Federation of Small Businesses. So if I say to us, I will be referring to the Federation of Small Businesses, not just myself. But yeah, I think when it comes to small businesses, the issue is definitely that lack of or perhaps lesser availability of time and resources. And as the other panelists have said already, it is definitely a workplace issue as well. So I think if there's small businesses on the call and want quite specific pieces of advice, I think the more concrete I can be, the better. So we can talk about specific, perhaps less costly adjustments, such as things like having available desk fans, or having access to a water fountain, or perhaps being near a restroom, or maybe adjusting uniforms so that they can be they're not as aggravating to some symptoms of menopause, such as hot flushes. But as I think Lauren said in her bit, these are very role specific and very industry specific. So even if I can give you these examples, they will not be exhausting. So I think the biggest sort of low cost thing that can be done is really opening up a dialogue, because if there is an open conversation, we can learn more about symptoms, how to identify them, but also how to help to accommodate for them in the workplace. So I think from things that perhaps require a little more time or resources, like training, whether that's for line managers, but I believe, and FSB believe, it should be for all staff, so that it's truly an open conversation, regardless of position or gender or anything like that. It would be hugely beneficial. And from that can stem other sort of things that, depending on the size of the business or perhaps the available resources, we've mentioned menopause policies. Whilst a small business may not be in a position to introduce a menopause policy, it could be a certain review of existing policy on like performance review, for example, or things like sickness absence, and perhaps adjusting it a little bit so there's a leeway for people who experience menopause and symptoms related to it. And yeah, I would say maybe on the slightly more time consuming or costly end of the spectrum, things like menopause champions, who have also been mentioned, or just appointing a member of staff if it's a larger small business, could also be beneficial to not only make sure that there is a dialogue and an open conversation, but also a person to refer to with confidence with any issues.
Definitely. I think confidence in that person will be important indeed. And then Alicia, maybe you can also briefly introduce yourself with the next question. In terms of menstruation, I hear sometimes people say, this is a topic everybody knows about. Why do we need to start addressing this in organizations now?
Thanks, Nell. Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Alicia Page and I work for Bloody Good Employers, which is part of the charity Bloody Good Period, and we run an accreditation program that works with employers essentially to remove challenges for people who menstruate in the workplace. And in response to the question now, I think there are kind of three bits that I'd like to pull out, even though there's lots of other things to talk about here. I think one is kind of picking up on a point that Lauren said earlier around the workforce, the workplace being designed for men, and really wanting to kind of touch on that as part of this question as well. You know, the workplace traditionally, historically, is a place for men, and we've had big kind of efforts to try and bring women into the workforce, and it really comes to speak around starting to focus on gender equity versus gender equality, or equity as a means to achieve equality. So we need to actually look at the practices that we have in place when it comes to the workplace and start to question them, rather than trying to get every single person to fit into this idea of what the workplace should be and what those existing structures are. And also, it's really important to think, when we're talking about the types of solutions or the types of changes that we might make to make the workplace more inclusive for people and more supportive of people who menstruate, is to recognize that a lot of those ideas and a lot of those solutions will benefit many other people for many other reasons. So whilst we're focusing specifically on trying to make the workplace more inclusive for people who menstruate, there are many other cases to do that. So one example is somebody I was speaking to introduced a pain and fatigue policy rather than going down the route of introducing a menstruation policy, because it allowed to consider the needs of somebody who menstruates, or the people who menstruate in their organisation, as well as people who were experiencing other symptoms but for other reasons. So yeah, it's really about focusing on menstruation, making it inclusive for that, but also thinking about how we can use that as a lens to support other people. And I think the last thing is to talk to our research. So before we developed our program, we did some research. We had been trending or following very closely what's happening with conversations around menopause, and I think it's definitely fair to say that a lot more employers have menopause on the agenda than they do periods and the rest of the experience of menstruation. And a lot of the employers that we work with, or a lot of the employers that I speak to, have kind of maybe started that menopause work and then thought, oh wait, what about the rest of the menstrual cycle? So we did some research to really understand the experiences of people when it comes to menstruation and their periods at work, and we found that a lot of people were experiencing or had experienced stress or anxiety around their period at work. So that was 89% of people who menstruate, so a really big majority. But the underlying reasons for that were really varied. So maybe on the more relatable side, it was things like pain, cramps, fatigue, not pleasant, but things that we might expect or might be able to relate to from personal experience. And then the more kind of cultural things around experiencing these problems, but feeling like you needed to conceal the fact that you were menstruating at work. So that could include things like not being able to be honest with your manager if you needed to take time off or you needed a break. People would say, I've got a headache. They wouldn't talk about the specific reason, which has a knock-on impact, because if you experience symptoms around your period and you're menstruating regularly every cycle, then it's actually not sick leave that you need. It's something a little bit different, and there needs to be some consideration of that. As well as things like being scared of bleeding through your clothes and worried about what kind of response you would get for that. So this idea of just not being able to be yourself at work and not being comfortable because of fear of what the response would be. And then you've kind of got the opposite end of the scale, which is things that 100% need to be addressed. And it's not just in the case of somebody who's menstruating that these need to be addressed, but it's things like lack of access to toilets, lack of access to breaks. We found that 4% of people didn't have access to toilets or breaks at work, and 11% only sometimes. And maybe there technically are these provisions in place, but if you work in a pressurized environment, let's say like a call center, for example, where your time is really, strictly monitored, then that's going to have an impact on how you can be at work and tend to your needs, especially when it comes to menstruation. So yeah, there's a whole host of reasons, but I think the biggest one is, focusing on how the workplace is designed for men and thinking about how we can achieve gender equity as a means to achieve gender equality.
Great. Love the response. Definitely touching a lot of elements that I've had worries about at my work or in the past, so definitely the case. And both of you have mentioned the word policy there. I was wondering maybe if Lauren or Madu can share some views on how would you start with changing policies? Is there any advice you could give?
Yeah, I think policies is an interesting one. Over the 8 years I've been working with organisations, I found that people will start with a menopause policy. However, the companies I've worked with longest have moved towards a wellbeing policy, because exactly like Lita said, it's more all-encompassing, it's treating each other as a human being, and it's stopping shining the light on specific menstruation or menopause issues. However, a lot of companies have gone through, they've gone through a journey. They've gone through really getting that deep understanding that actually our biology, our physiology is different. And that has when it's embraced, we actually can increase our performance even more than all those years of wearing a mask and hiding what we're going through. So I think policies, it's about, asking your frontline, asking your people, what do they want? I think that it always comes best from the front line when you ask the people who are out doing the work, out doing the job, what type of help and support do they want? It might be a policy, it might be guidance documents. So global organisations tend to go with guidance because, culturally and regionally, you can't necessarily always roll out policy. It might be menstruation or menopause specific, but then it might be more general for overall health and well-being. But I think it's doing that litmus test. If someone's going through menstruation and menopause, would the job design fit? Does the recruitment policy fit? Does the attendance policy fit? Does the performance policy fit? It's about going through all the policies and just testing out. So I think a combination of testing out what you've got in place, adding to it, adapting it and changing it, or perhaps including a policy or guidance document. And then equally is asking your people, what do they want? Because they're the ones that ultimately you're doing this for. And I think it has to come from everybody rather than just top down.
Definitely. I think we all want to have a say in these changes, because what works for some people might not work for others. So definitely needs to work for everybody. So I was thinking in terms of, with COVID, a lot of discussions also came around mental health and being involved in the organization still while you're being separated from everybody at work. I don't know, Kate, do you have any advice in terms of how do you help people in the organization that are going through changes or stressful circumstance? Do you have any advice for them?
Well, it's a big question for a few minutes left at the end, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think I'd start by reiterating what Alicia and Lauren have said in terms of, everything that you do to create a psychologically safe work environment where you create this authentic trust, where people feel confident about, speaking up and talking about what may be challenges for them, that you are asking questions, that you are asking your workforce about what they need, are all the right steps. And when we look at psychological health and safety as part of this, and look at mental health and what might be going on within an organisation, the starting point is really to understand what within the organisation is creating that stress. We talk about work-related stress, so excessive hours. We've touched on bullying and harassment. Actually, all of the topics we've been talking about today here, if people don't feel confident about speaking up that they might be having challenges because of menstruation or menopause, or even things like occupational cancers, when we think about an aging workforce, when cancer tends to come out more, then actually we've got to create an environment where people feel able to talk about these things, and the organisation needs to take action to address them. So understanding what causes these what we call psychosocial risks, it's a terminology, but what causes these work-related elements of work-related stress, and doing something about it is the starting point. Within this, there is a piece of understanding what your own mechanisms are and your own reactions to stress or anxiety actually are, you know. So there is that education piece, you know, that I took a picture of the slide that talked to, you know, what the different hormones mean and what the impacts that they have. You know, there's a certain amount of understanding, you know, well, actually, you know, how do I deal with stress? What helps me to help manage that? But first and foremost, it's the organisation taking action to deal with those causes. And I haven't got time to go into kind of what those are. That's a whole subject in itself. But for the listeners who want to know more, and it encompasses a lot of what we've been talking, the international standard that I mentioned, ISO 45003, is a framework, a best practice guide to looking at psychological health and safety. So what are these work related causes of mental ill health, and that gives guidance for organisations, as we were talking about the other standards as well today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Kate. Madu, I have one that relates a little bit to this topic of, you know, mental health. Someone saying, I'm currently suffering with some menopause symptoms and sometimes struggle to function certain days. And I have my own business. Could you give me some advice on how could I raise that with my clients that I'm not performing as I usually would? Is there any advice you can think of?
I would actually say it depends how open she wants to be with the customers, that, you know, if she is going through the menopause, she might be having a bad day. But I would actually say that maybe think about that there might be a day that you're not having a good day, but you could always carry on and just do it tomorrow. And maybe actually just letting the customer know that I can't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. That's what I would say. And actually not to worry about it, not to get concerned about it, because that is always tomorrow. And you will do with it, and you probably feel more energetic than you actually feel on the day that you are feeling not 100%, or probably, you know, if you're feeling low in mood or stressed, you know, just doing things, just still doing some small steps on that particular day that you are feeling bad. But just remember that there's always tomorrow and you can still go back to it. And it's just hopefully that their customers would be able to understand that.
I would hope that people have understanding in these circumstances if you explain it indeed. I think we do have one or two more questions, maybe with short answers now. Let me just double check which ones we still received. In terms of COVID lockdowns, someone is asking, do you think that has had a negative or a positive impact on small businesses' ability to support staff? Rebecca, I think that's one for you.
Absolutely, thank you for that one. I think as with much to do with the COVID lockdowns, there's both negatives to pull out of it and also positives. I will start with the positives. And I think that something that's definitely been drawn to a lot of people's attention is this link between inclusivity in the workplace and flexibility. And unfortunately, something that still persists is the sort of flexibility bias or stigma, where it's perceived as something quite bad, often associated with women and their inability to be, you know, fully in the workplace, whether because of childcare or other care issues, or things like the menopause or menstruation. So I think that this sort of more normalized viewpoint on flexibility, and also, for example, our study that we published earlier this year showed that 91% of small businesses are offering flexible working, and there's been an increase since 2018. I believe it was 80 something, maybe 88, 89% then. So there's this sort of increase acceptance towards flexible working, which is something that could help when it comes to you know, just making sure that the workplace provides a safe and accommodating space to their employees. But with the sort of negative aspects of lockdowns is, of course, the lack of perhaps ability to speak about things, and we've discussed the importance about, you know, of an open dialogue. And if we don't have that, if we don't have that safe space to you know, have these conversations, that could have a negative impact. However, I have spoken in preparation for this with some of our members, and I asked if there was something that they've done during the lockdowns that, you know, showed that there was still an opportunity, that even though there wasn't, you know, physical workplaces where people met. Some of our members had online e-learning training courses for their line managers, and also an online workshop, which was called something like Menopause at the Workplace, and apparently that was received really well. So there were challenges, but also I'm hopeful that the increased sort of flexibility, whether that is to do with home working or reduced hours, flexible starts, things like that, that's a positive, or a move in the positive direction.
Definitely, I agree with that. I hope that we are moving in the right direction and not losing some of the progress we've made where it's needed. In terms of diversity, because we haven't really covered diversity in this Q&A, so I do see one question here that I thought might be very good as a last one. Madu, this one might be for you. Someone is saying, in terms of diversity, we have learned that if senior leadership are not competent or used to engage the workforce or the diverse workforce, then diversity won't really occur. Do you have any advice for senior leadership to recognize this, or potentially recognize that this is a blind spot for them?
Yes. I guess if the senior leadership, if you have the senior leadership team haven't got representation of the diversity of the workforce that they may have, is actually probably think about, if they are going to recruit someone, to have someone that represents the organization too, because I think what would actually happen is that the those on that senior leadership team would probably listen better to a person that's from that diverse background, but within their team, within that leadership team. I definitely think that is very important, where it can actually show representation. The other thing probably to do is to bring evidence in the forefront, is to actually provide real case studies in the organisation, and that's by sort of asking specific type of questions as to what the workforce are seeing, and either do it anonymously if they feel uncomfortable sort of having their name written on there, but having that flexibility of doing that and showing that to the senior leadership team, because they'll have the evidence there as to how the workforce are actually feeling, and the fact that there might be situations that they're not getting support or they're not getting help in, and them being made aware as to the different type of diverse people they have in the organization or in their company, and making them aware. They need to just learn, they need to be aware, and it's actually, you know, organizing some days where hopefully senior leadership teams can get involved and actually see what diverse the diverse people that they actually have in the organization. By doing the case exercise, it'll actually prevent them from being defensive, because they've got the evidence there, so they can't deny anything. It should actually be there. That's what I would say, is actually do the case studies, and hopefully they would recruit people that have got that does represent the organization.
Yeah, some good advice, some case studies to consider, some hard facts they can't ignore. Definitely, that's always good advice. I think that's probably all the time we have left. I know that Alicia, you wanted to mention an event that's taking place if people want to learn a bit more about menstruation in the organization. So maybe you can very briefly mention it.
Yeah, I was hoping to cleverly weave it in, but I haven't, so I'll take this opportunity really quickly. We have an event, which I think hopefully the link can be shared in the chat now, on Tuesday next week at 12 o'clock, with some of our launch partners from the Bloody Good Employers scheme. So for anybody who's interested or wants to learn more about menstrual health support in the workplace, that's a great opportunity to come along and actually hear firsthand from employers who are going through the programme and the experiences that they've had. So hopefully a nice addition to what we've heard today around guidance and all of the different things that we've talked about, but having the opportunity to hear directly from employers about how they've gone about doing that work.
Great, super. And I know that Lauren also, I think you provide some free training on your website as well, so people can check out Lauren's website as well if they want more guidance on that front of menopause. And with that, I want to thank all our fantastic speakers and panel members here. Thank you so much for your help and support today. And I'm going to close it out with just saying a few more words on our public consultation. Don't forget to register with me if you have an interest to comment on that. Very important. So we're representing every kind of experience out there. Thank you very much. And then we also want to mention the Aging Society Standards if you want to find out more about building an age-inclusive environment in your organization, or a care-inclusive environment in organizations is another element that is not often covered. Please go to our website for that. And with that, I want to thank everybody on the line for joining. And if you want to join other events from BSI, we have our events page that you can go through. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.